Bach. I'm the CEO and founder of an organization called Measures for Justice. It's based in Rochester, New York, and we bring transparency and accountability to the mix in how justice gets pursued in the United States. But before I get into it all, a few reminders. One is tonight's presentation is being recorded, so if you could silence your phones, that would really help. The second is if you have any questions for the guest speakers, please fill them out on question cards that were on your seats. And if you're joining us on YouTube, there's a YouTube chat where you can put your questions in, and I think there's quite a number of people on YouTube, so thank you for coming. So let's get into it. So when I am at a cocktail party and someone asks, what do you do? I say I founded a criminal justice data organization. And people look at me like, well, what is that about? And then I usually say something like, well, I wrote a book. It's called Ordinary Injustice. And the premise is that there are all these chronic problems out there in the criminal justice system. For example, I went to one community in Mississippi, and the prosecutor had no idea that he hadn't prosecuted a domestic violence case in 21 years. But yet, I went around to the other counties, and they all did collect some sort of data, but they had it on steno pads, they had it in crappy little computers, and they couldn't really see, how one county compared to another. So, the idea for the organization really came from stories like that. And the idea was, could we begin to put data out there so that patterns could be detected? So that people in the communities, in that community, there was a Black community on the other side of the railroad tracks that was very well aware that there were no domestic violence cases being prosecuted, and they would form a constituency, right? And they would say to the prosecutor, if you don't do better, we're going to vote you out of office. Now that rarely happens in America, that people actually look at the patterns of what's going on. And the reason is that the data really doesn't exist, and it definitely doesn't exist publicly. And so people holding their criminal justice systems accountable is extremely rare. So, and people say, oh, but there seems to be a lot of criminal justice data. And I say, well, no, actually, look, if I asked you, how is the school system here in San Francisco, what would you say? Or in the Bay Area? And you would say, oh, I know Lowell, and that's a really great school. I'm like, well, how do you know that? And then you would say, well, because there are teacher-student ratios, there's college admissions rates, we have all sorts of measures, test scores. And then I'd say, well, do you know how that compares to other places? And then you would sort of tell me yes. And then if I said to you, well, where are the good hospitals around here? You could probably tell me by, type of specialty, right? You could tell me that, UCSF is really great for elderly care, Stanford for cancer. And now if I said to you, so how does the criminal justice system work where you live? How does San Francisco compare to other places in the Bay Area, or how does San Francisco compare to LA, to Boston, to Rochester, New York? You might say, well, I think the retail theft is really bad here because I keep on reading that in the paper, and I think that there's but I don't really know how it compares, and I don't really know, and that's because we don't have the data and we don't use it in a uniform set of measures to compare to other places. So we measure everything in this country, right? We measure hospitals, schools, sports, we measure up the wazoo, right? But we don't measure our criminal justice system. And so that's why I started Measures for Justice. So what we do is we develop tools and services to help communities, which include our main parts are police, courts, and prosecutors, and we try and help people reshape the criminal justice system so that it's fully transparent, accessible, and accountable. Our motto is always, no data, no change. And we believe the way to get there is with data. And so today we're going to talk about where AI fits into the mix and how we can use data to improve outcomes for the people affected by the system. We have two superpowers at Measures for Justice. One is that we're nonpartisan. So we just give you the facts, and then you decide what to do. We don't tell you specifically what to do with the data. And I think that one of our panelists may have a big problem with that, but we'll see how that works. And the second thing is that we demand that the public is always involved in whatever we measure. So you have to not only listen to the public and ask them, like, well, what data do you want to see? And then we try and respond to that and give them the data they want. And then we also set public data-driven goals with the data. But the problem, again, is the data is really scarce and it's bad. Like, the data is smelly, it's got, it's got all sorts of issues, and often we find people that are still keeping it in files. So I thought we'd introduce you to one of those people today with a very, very short 4-minute movie. And it's from our Emmy-nominated film series called Let's Be Clear. It's a judge in Selma, Alabama, who we're working with. And we're trying to get her data house in order, and you can see the challenges that she's facing. Her name is Judge Vernetta Perkins Walker.
When you are preparing a case as a prosecutor, you build it on evidence. I am making an argument for reimagining justice. And as evidence for that argument, I have to use the data of where we are right now to paint a picture of why change is needed. My name is Vernetta Perkins, and I am the first female judge in Dallas County, Alabama. I was in this courtroom pretty often. As a child growing up, I would always participate in the mock trial competitions. I would play a lawyer. It seems kind of prophetic now that I ended up back here. Graduated Selma High School. Right out of law school, I became a prosecutor in Montgomery. I was thriving at the DA's office, gaining some prestige and notoriety, building my little American dream life. Never imagined that I would be here long term. Just kind of got engulfed in being back at home and what was needed here. Look at that, this whole neighborhood is gone. Whether we like it or not, we're at a turning point in history in Selma. This tornado that just came has ravaged our community from one end of the county to the other. Hundreds of houses damaged, including mine. The county jail is damaged, cannot house any inmates. And I do believe with my whole heart that this is a moment for us. We have a unique opportunity to reimagine detention, reimagine justice. How do we actually do that? What are the action steps? Any organizing, strategic planning space will tell you the process begins with data. We have the pieces of it, but it's not gathered together or aggregated in a way where it can be useful. We don't know who's in the jail, how long they've been there. Are these people that have been in jail for 5 years with no trial? What are the barriers to prosecution? We have boxes and boxes of warrants that haven't been served. So many cases have fallen through the system. So now is a moment for leadership. Are we as leaders going to hold ourselves accountable and build these ways to report out to the people? There's so many solutions that can be built if we understood exactly what was happening, and the data will answer those questions. My vision for this city in 10 years is a place that is alive and thriving. It's a learning community filled with opportunity, a restorative criminal justice system where people feel that courts serve them. We're gonna have to look at ourselves as a community and make these decisions about who we are and who we wanna be. I really do believe that Selma is about to change the world again.
So that's Selma, Alabama, and that is Judge Perkins Walker, and she lives basically in a data desert. And she's not alone. There are communities all over this country that have no idea what's happening in the criminal justice system beyond what you see on the front pages. Now, I could give you so many reasons why, but trust me, there are tons of places like San Francisco that have data, and even though they've been working on it really hard, it's still needs a lot of work. So she's part of she's part of the problem. It doesn't tell the whole story. But I could give you many, many reasons why the data is so bad in criminal justice. But the biggest is there are many institutions that just don't want to be transparent. I mean, would you want to have somebody, showing what you do every day, walking around after you? Transparency is really hard, right? So everybody wants to keep it the status quo, but there's also some structural problems, okay? There are 3,144 counties in America, and then each one has about 7 agencies that comprise the criminal justice system. So there's police, there's prosecutors, there's public defender data, all kept separate, all disconnected. There's probation and parole data, and then there's court data. And a lot of it overlaps. Some of it's fungible, but a lot of it's all siloed, and the systems don't talk to each other. We see this again and again with police and prosecutors saying, you did it, And part of it is that the systems do not talk to each other. And then the other problem is that each state keeps the data in its own way, right? So California's data is completely different than Arizona and Nevada and Washington, right? So everybody keeps their data in their own way, and so you have to work really hard to make these systems comparable. And so this is, to us, the story is really fascinating. There's some of us here for Measures for Justice. We could talk to you all day about it. It's not flashy. Sometimes we sort of say, it's like the underbelly, right? It's like the foundation of the house. People want to go in and look at the house and think there's all this fantastic furniture and this is what I would do and if this were my house. But who really wants to talk about how the water's seeping through the floor? It's a foundational issue. The foundation, though, is why we believe that there are so many bad outcomes, and they're often at the heart of bad policy. AI is already being used in criminal justice to make predictions. It's scanning through video materials for discovery and assessing whether defendants are at risk for reoffending. And AI is incredible. We're already using it in our own organization to train our products to clean more data and do it faster. But what we want, and this is why I'm so excited about the 2 people I'm about to introduce you to, is big systems change. And this means helping counties put together data sets really where they have none. And fixing data with problems at scale for the 3,144 counties. So that people like Judge Perkins can see patterns, right? Can patterns to make the right choices to help her community. And AI would be perfect for that, right? So now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our guest speakers, Rafi Krikorian and Tom Khalil, to explore how AI, underpinned by high-quality data, can drive social impact in the criminal justice system. Rafi Krikorian is the Chief Technology Officer at Emerson Collective, where he runs a tech group for the venture policy, political, and philanthropic teams, and hosts Technically Optimistic, which is an amazing podcast where he takes a deep dive on how AI is making us think differently about everything. It's a must listen. And over the course of Rafi's career, he's been at the forefront of scaling technology while keeping a focus on ethical considerations and social impact. He was an executive at Twitter, running a global engineering team focused on making the company's back-end infrastructure more reliable. And at Uber, he oversaw and deployed the first ever fleet of self-driving cars in record time. And in 2016, Rafi joined the Democratic National Committee as the first ever chief technology officer to overhaul the party infrastructure and analytics to enhance security and equip the party with modern tools to effectively engage voters. Tom Khalil is the CEO of Renaissance Philanthropy, an organization dedicated to supporting philanthropists and foundations in developing and implementing ambitious strategies leveraging science, technology, and innovation. Tom served in the White House for President Bill Clinton and President Barack Obama, where he designed and launched dozens of science and technology initiatives for a national scale. Tom previously served as Chief Innovation Officer at Schmidt Futures, an organization that finds and connects talented people across fields, generations, and geographies to harness their collective skills for public benefit. Known for his ability to connect visionary ideas with actionable outcomes, Tom has a track record of designing programs that drive progress and collaboration at the intersection of science, technology, and philanthropy. Rafi and Tom, welcome. Come on up. And thanks so much for being here with us today. Yay. Okay, so let's talk about Judge Perkins. She's in a data wasteland, missing incomplete, inaccessible data in boxes, and a really difficult CMS system. AI is underpinned by data, right? So where do we start? Where do we start with her? I mean,
I wouldn't start with AI. I mean, so why is AI different from traditional programming in computer science? With traditional programming, we explicitly tell the computer what to do. We say, if this happens, do X. If this other things, do Y. With machine learning, which is the variant of AI that the research community and the private sector has been emphasizing recently, we train an algorithm by giving it lots of examples. So why have we been able to have these large language models like ChatGPT that seem like there's some human-like intelligence? It's because those algorithms were trained by reading everything on the internet and giving it the task of predicting the next word. So we can't airdrop AI into Selma and have the problem that the data doesn't exist, because AI is all about training an algorithm as opposed to explicitly telling what the algorithm to do. So the problem that AI could solve is if you had a number of systems and they're currently not talking to each other, and you want to reduce the time and cost associated with increasing the interoperability between multiple databases, then that's something that AI could make, probably some contribution to. But as you said, the important question would be the political will associated with whether the various stakeholders want to increase the level of transparency in the system.
Right, so there's like a cultural problem, a political problem, and there's also what you saw was like right after a hurricane, we were sort of like, okay, well, we're gonna come help you, and we kind of have a blank slate. Like, we could start again. So like, how would you set it up right? I mean, you have a chance.
Rafi?
I mean, I look at these problems like there's layers on these problems. Like, it's not like one issue that you need to go at. And I think that Tom's right. I think like these systems are like these socio-technical systems. Like, we need to talk about the cultural change to actually record information, how to record it properly. We need to talk about the processes involved on like actually getting that information stored in a meaningful way that we can access it and like and record it for posterity's sake, and we can actually make it transparent. We need to talk about the cultural aspect of just like what happens if we start recording all this police data. Is the police department going to be happy with us or sad with us all of a sudden because we're just putting all their information now out there? So I think there's so many different places to start, and I think like you have to look at the system as a whole. Like, a technologist is going to be like, I'm going to start building a database, but they're going to first ask the question, just like, what is the thing you want me to make sure actually works at the end? Like, what's the thing I need to go do? So we need to figure out how to like task that technologist with like, I want you to record all the information coming off the police system. Why do I want to do that? We need to like actually like break down this problem a bunch of different ways. Getting to that like dream that judge has of like, we want a better society, a better city because we have data transparency is like a 5 million step process. So just trying to figure out like, what's that step one? And it's probably a set of conversations that we need to have just of like, this is what data is. This is what it means if we start collecting it and start there in a lot of ways.
I mean, the way to think about a technologist is that they have to have a hammer. They have a hammer.
Well, they have a hammer, yeah.
That they're not going to be able to tell you what role they think technology could be potentially helpful in until you are capable of articulating a problem that is at this sort of Goldilocks level where the problem is big enough to matter, but it's targeted enough to be tractable. So let me give you an example from some research that Sendhil Mullainathan and his colleagues have been doing. So what they discovered was that a very consequential decision that we make in the criminal justice system is someone appears before the court and the judge has to say, does the defendant have to await trial in their home or in jail? And so what is how do judges do? They roughly 72% of the time they send them home, and they have an 11% crime rate that is associated with those decisions. So what Sendhil and his colleagues found is that using an algorithm, you can do one of two things. You can keep the crime rate fixed. In other words, you can have crime rate at 11%, and you can reduce the prison population by 40%, or you could keep the jail population fixed and reduce the crime by 24%, right? So a technologist can't tell you which of those is better. That's a normative, ethical, political decision. But what a technologist can do is to say, if you tell me what problem you're trying to solve at that level of like, can we do a better job on pre-trial decision making? They can tell you whether they believe that technology can do better in the same way that self-driving cars are reducing accidents relative to human drivers by roughly 90%.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the phrase you used, Amy, which is like, we have a blank slate. We can just like, it's actually a very daunting statement. I'll put my engineering hat on for a second, or my technologist hat on for a second. I wouldn't know what to do. What do you want me to do then in that world?
Right. Well, what she wants, because we've been working with her, she wants to be able to look across different groups that are vulnerable in her community, including, people ages 16 to 23. Mm-hmm. She wants to be able to look at the data by race, by sex, by type of crime.
But that's not an AI issue. That's
right.
That's a relational database.
Right, that is a relational. But then what she wants to do is to see like when people are diverted out of the system, what happens to them, and then she wants it to be tied to housing and to education and to other programs that they've got to see like which ones are successful and are people being sucked back into the system less or more on certain programs, and so they can see like real successful outcomes. That's what she wants, like this incredible integrated thing, and she wants it to be connected to the jail because she doesn't know who's in jail and who's not, So like she wants to be, and that is, all of that, and you could predict things if you go to this program, you could do AI could, but there's got to be this like underneath foundation of good data, because like when we did, I'll just say, I'm going to call, when we started, and we did it a long time ago, and Florida's improved so much since then, but we started with Florida's court data. They didn't collect data on Hispanics, okay? Like Miami, no Hispanics.
Just
and
no
then,
Hispanics.
Yeah, and then the code book, which I think has been fixed, referred to them as Asians, as Orientals, and they had the date of birth. We had a joke in the office, which was that everybody was born a crime there because everyone's date of birth was the day for the crime. It was and this is for the whole state of Florida. And we worked on it, we fixed it, and we integrated it, and now we got a law passed, and now there are 5 different data sets, all with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and so things are much, much better. But that state is not alone. That's the only state that's passed this legislation. Actually, California has passed it, but it hasn't been funded, and they have till 2027 to pass it. So, that's what I'm talking about. This is and maybe this is all data this bad? Because I'm not. I mean, is this hospital data? All this. Is this it's all bad like that?
It's not. I mean, I think there are sort of
really
degrees, right?
Yeah.
But your basic point is you should not be looking to AI for the solution to the data not existing or being crappy.
Right, but can it be used for AI is coming, this thing is here, and it's how do we begin to say
But that's where I get to the question of use
politics,
cases,
yeah.
right? So if you look at what is going on in the private sector, they are taking this sort of raw capability that is being created by the leading companies, many of whom are in the Bay Area, and they're saying, how do we use this to solve a particular problem that a real customer has? So an example is that they're saying, okay, we're not going to use AI to solve all legal problems. We're going to figure out whether we can use this to increase the productivity of people who do contract law in Canada. So that is the level of granularity at which the private sector is operating. So if you go to a technologist and say, please create a more just society for me, they are not going to know how to help you, right? But here's something that I could imagine happening. One of the things that we're beginning to see is AI improve student learning outcomes. So there have been randomized controlled trials of what happens when a Ghanaian student has a mobile phone connected to an AI-based digital tutor, and they are learning twice as much with the AI-based digital tutor than they are in their math course. And why is that? Because of a very well-known problem in education, which is if you are a math teacher and you are responsible for covering the 8th grade math curriculum, and there are kids in your class who are learning at the 4th grade level, everything is going over their head. So this old compared to what thing that we talked about, the status quo is sufficiently bad so that an AI-based digital tutor can double student learning outcomes. So imagine that we use that for prison education so that by the time people got out, they had a skill that was a ticket to a in-demand family supporting wage. Could that reduce prison recidivism? I don't know the answer to that, but it is an experiment that I think would be worth trying. Right? So that's what I'm saying is you can't go to a technologist and say, I would like you to conjure up a more fair and transparent and just society for me. They will not be able to help you. But if you say, I want people who are doing the prosecution of complex white-collar crime to have better tools to be able to detect fraud and accounting fraud and offshore tax havens, AI can help you with that. I think that it's quite plausible that AI could improve the quality of prison education, and that could reduce prison recidivism. We already have evidence that if you can give a parole officer all of the information from different sources, that and when they're responsible for handling 80 or 90 cases, that can help them move people out of the criminal justice
Right.
system more rapidly. So that's at the level. You can build up from that, but that's the level at
Right.
which I believe, at least, you have to have the discussion.
But like, I'll take the bait for a second. So what do we actually need to go do? Like maybe in this blank slate scenario. And so I'm kind of with Tom. I don't think AI is the level that we start at. We need to talk about data collection. To your question before, I was just like, is all data that bad? Like every piece of data that's like collected by a human or about a human is going to be noisy. Like it's just like, that's just a situation that you're going to live in. Humans are messy people. Like we collect data badly and data about me is going to be not in the best shape. So if we can collect a lot of data, what AI might be able to do is then tell you those trends that you're interested in. Now we have to figure out like what data is actually needed in order to figure out which trends we actually want to go look at.
And it may not be AI, it might be linear regression.
It literally might be just like the most simple statistics you can possibly pull off that people will claim as AI. But then we're gonna have conversations about like bias in that data. How is that data collected? We're gonna have questions that are just like what more information could we add to make our correlations get better? So like I feel like there's a starting foundation that if we can get right, that if we can do, and I think this is the work that you do, then we can have a conversation of like what could AI do on top of that?
Right. But like Tom's point, which is completely well taken, is you go in with a precise thing that you want to do. So it's like, you want to collect data. Well, data for what? Okay, well, we want to, in Selma, Alabama, get a diversion rate. Well, in order to get a diversion rate, you have to have all these other data points. You're going to collect all of these things. Is that the way to do it? Or is the way to perhaps use AI to start assessing people's data and telling them like, here's your garbage, and then like, this is how you can turn it into something not smelly.
Garbage in, garbage out. Like that's
I knew
like,
someone was going to
that's
say
like
that.
that's like the fundamental. That's going to be like one of the fundamental mantras of dealing with, especially this type of like human-related data. So yeah, we could potentially. I mean, the question is just like, what are we looking at? Where is that information? Is that collected by a government? Are we asking people for their data? Then we have a whole set of privacy questions that we need to look at. But like, bad data is going to lead to bad results, bad outcomes, etc.
And that's the status quo. That is, I can tell you that with pretty much certainty. But you're saying, yeah, but I do think that criminal justice is like 30 years behind like health or education, like, because I think we don't have this.
But every field complains about their data. Yeah. I mean, and for example, let's just take electronic health records. Electronic health records were developed for billing purposes.
Yep.
So is the data that is in an electronic health record designed to promote healthy living by patients? No, it is not. Like it is designed for hospitals to bill payers for episodes of care. So everyone complains about their data.
Have you seen other fields successfully achieve positive outcomes working within and resetting a complex infrastructure as they go? Like, have you seen, like, I mean, you've worked in the White House and you've done all sorts of complex things, resetting.
So if we're talking about machine learning, fields in machine learning have made progress when four things are true. One is you have a well-defined problem, because remember, what does machine learning do? If you give it an input and an output, it can learn a function that maps between the input and the output. So you give it English and it gives you French. You give it an email, it tells you whether it's spam or not. you show it a picture and it shows you like what the caption for the picture should be. That's what it does, right? So you have to have a problem that where you have a well-defined problem. You have an input and you have an output, and you want to learn the function that maps between the input and the output. That's number one. Number two, you have a large, diverse, high-quality data set. Three,
That's
you
what's
have
missing.
you have a benchmark that lets you know whether or not you're making progress on it, and you have a leaderboard. So when those four things are in place, magic happens, right? So I'll give you an example. So we went almost overnight from knowing the shape of 200,000 proteins to having very solid computational predictions for 200 million proteins. And why is that a big deal? It's a big deal because the shape of the protein determines its function. So in the future, what is already happening is that this is going to transform our ability to develop therapies and vaccines that are based on this technology. So I just met with the CEO of a Indian biotech company who is using these advances in AI and machine learning and mRNA vaccines, and he wants to develop 3 vaccines that will save 1 million lives a year. So that's why people are excited about this. But
that's
you can't do
awesome.
that. You can't do that if you have, if the data is in someone's filing cabinet.
Right,
So,
and that's
and
right.
AI
right,
is not going to solve that problem.
But here's the thing, it's not just. I mean, filing cabinets. We gave you like a really extreme example there, but like Rafi. So we're talking about, like he mentioned that incredible example, and I hope that work flies incredibly. But it was the number 2, I think, was high quality data, right?
Yeah.
And I could tell you, we did a study with a public defender in California, one of the largest cities here, and we got their data, and what they wanted to see if was the zero bail policy during COVID. Did people come back into the system? Did they recidivate? And we got an answer that really didn't jibe with what the research showed. And then we said, you know what? Let's forget that data set. Let's go look at the court data, which is fungible with the public defender. And we got the answer that we thought that we would get, which jibes with the research. Now, it was a much more complete data set, much more robust, still incredibly flawed. That's how bad policy happens, right? And so, I think where our organization is going is we're thinking about data infrastructure a lot, and we're wondering, can we think about creating some sort of a movement to basically get people to get their data houses in order so that people aren't coming and putting a little bot on your public defender data and asking it a question. That is the danger that's coming. What do you think about that, Rafi?
I mean, yes. We need to inspire people to think of this problem. I mean, the healthcare problem reminds me of during the throes of the pandemic, Spain was wondering why all these kids were dying when you look at their data sets of when you're doing nationalized tracking, all these children 0 through 3, 4, were disproportionately dying when compared to every other country in the world. And when some researchers finally dug into it, it's because Spain literally in their national tracking system have 2 digits that they use for age. And so anyone over 100 got recorded as 0 or 1 or 2 or 3. If you're 101, you died, you're recorded as a 1-year-old. So all of a sudden, Spain has an incredibly huge problem with children dying during COVID, which is just not true, right? And so that's I think these type of data issues, especially when it comes to people, is repeated in every single field all around the world. And we just need to inspire people on then what's possible if we sort of fix these problems. We haven't even
so
talked
how
about
do we do that? I love that. Let's talk about that. How do we inspire people? Because it's boring, okay? I mean, not to you and me and whatever, but generally, how do you say, because it's
So
getting your house in order.
I think that, so if you think about what are the precepts of evidence-based policy, which presumably you are an advocate for.
Yes.
Okay. So what are the precepts of evidence-based policy? It is, we should do more stuff that works and less stuff that doesn't work. And we should use evidence where it exists and where we should build it where it doesn't. So to me, you're not going to overnight give all 3,000 counties this sort of dream information system. But one of the things you can do is to say, okay, we have this question about whether or not this particular policy would work.
Yeah, make
So
it towards the goal.
We could do a randomized controlled trial or
Yes.
something like that to determine whether that works, right? Or, there may be some natural experiments. So I think we've had some natural experiments in California about whether decriminalizing shoplifting is a good idea. I think we have pretty mixed evidence about whether that's a good thing or not. But in Mississippi, they created the system where you could earn early parole for nonviolent crimes, and they've had a 98% success rate, and the Republican governor just signed a bill extending the experiment. So to me, that's, if you want evidence-based policy, that one way to do that is not to say, okay, like we have to
love
have
that.
21st century information systems for all 3,000 counties, right? Because I think that is unlikely to happen.
Right.
But what we could say is, what are the ideas out there where we want to do a multiple experiments? Because I don't think you can't generalize on the basis of one experiment, but you can generalize on the basis of multiple experiments. But for example, people are doing multiple experiments to say, all right, if we have prison overcrowding, and we can give the judge the option to do, electronic monitoring, what are the implications of that, right? Does it wind up reducing crime and reducing costs? Because putting someone in jail is $150 a day, electronic monitoring is $15 a day. So certainly from the point of view of cost, electronic monitoring is less expensive. But before you scale that up and say, oh, let's do that at a national level, people are funding randomized controlled trials to say, what happens when we do that?
I also really believe this might be my pipe dream that I live in, but I also really believe transparency is super important. If you start showing people what all this information is, what it looks like, and be like, that doesn't match my intuition. Where am I in that information? How do you personalize it so these statistics that we're looking at actually mean something to each individual? And I think that is also a driving force. So I agree. I love outcomes-based, but I also think of figuring out ways to connect it down to people and making them feel that.
Yeah, we've had really great success. Once you make things transparent, you can't go back. People in the community want to see it. The people in office feel like they can't take it back. And also, the people in office, when we show that they've had bad outcomes, it's amazing, and it's actually helped me a lot at work, because I've seen what these law enforcement officials do is they come out and they say, okay, this isn't where we want it to be, so this is what I'm going to do to fix it. And people are fine. If you come out and you say, this is what we're going to do, it cuts a lot of ice. Even though transparency is generally not something that people easily want to go towards. Which gets me to this other point, which is you're both in the philanthropy field now. You both have worked in government. I wanted to read you something that was in Philanthropy Today last week. It named the top 10 things that happened last year. I don't know if you saw that, but it said, there's a cliche about hot funding trends that says, what goes up must come down. But we've never seen a boom and bust cycle quite so head-spinning as the case of post-2020 donor pullback from the criminal justice reform movement. And why the pullback? I mean, it's in the nature of this country, right? Like we swing, we go from one extreme to the next. Like post George Floyd, there was defund the police, there was, a huge DEI movement, and then there seemed to be a proliferation of crime in cities, and now it's swung to be more law and order, and then it'll probably go back to defund the police, and then it'll go back to lock everyone up for life. I mean, with your experience in philanthropy and politics, how would you position today's need for investment in infrastructure efficiency in a culture that's so focused on immediate gratification and outcomes? That's a hard one.
So one of my favorite websites is called Our World in Data. And one of the things that the people who developed that website point out, three things. Things are terrible.
Things aren't?
Things are terrible.
Things are terrible.
Number one.
Oh.
Number two, things have gotten much better. And number three, things can get much better still. So let's take under 5 child mortality. Every year, 5 million kids under the age of 5 die every year. You could say that's terrible, and it is. If that child mortality rate were the same that it was in 1800, that number would not be 5 million, that number would be 50 million. If the world was like Sweden, that number would not be 5 million, it would be 500,000. So you have to keep all those three things in mind at the same time. Things are terrible. 5 million kids under the age of 5 are dying, many of easily preventable diseases. Things have improved an order of magnitude. So it used to be the case that only half of the kids would make it to adolescence. Think about that. And if the world were like Sweden, there's room for another order of magnitude improvement. So I think that because of people call this the thermostatic theory of American politics. That is, American opinion moves in the opposite direction of policy. So as soon as you have a progressive in the White House and they start spending more money, like Obamacare, you get the rise of the Tea Party. And then if and you can see the same sort of thing that happens when conservatives are in control and they go overboard. So, I think the question is, are there ways for us to make, steadier incremental progress as opposed to arguing for things that have no long-term basis for political support?
Wow. Rafi, what do you think? I mean, what would you tell philanthropy about getting the infrastructure right for AI?
Yeah, infrastructure is not sexy is the problem. You
got to make it a goal.
You got we have to figure out what's the thing we want to actually solve for, and we back into building the infrastructure that can power that. And so I think people find results really sexy. So what are the things that we want to go solve first? And then we can build technology that that's needed to actually pull that off in the grand scheme of things. I think building tech for the sake of building tech, building these platforms for the sake of building platforms, no one's going to get it.
Yep.
No one's going to understand it. Our roads don't even work properly. How are we going to build this kind of technology in the first place?
Our roads are good.
So I think it's being more results oriented.
Yeah.
Is sort of and then we can draw the path backwards from there is how I would look at it.
Problem is, in terms of the criminal justice system, is that everybody has a different goal.
Sure.
Some people will want to, increase the number of felonies for, theft at the Walgreens, and other people will, want it reduced to, just a simple walk out and, get a little ticket. And, it's this fascinating thing where the goal is elusive. If the prosecutors wants to get elected again. The police commissioner just doesn't want to get fired by the mayor. Everybody's got their own. Some people want reform. Some people. So the question is, how can you make the system faster, better, and cheaper? And if you can nail those three things, then you've got a winning goal. Okay, we have all of these questions. But anything else we want to say before I go on?
No, just that I just wanted to agree with Rafi. So I worked on an initiative that during the Obama administration that we announced in 2012 that was about data science. And the tagline was data to knowledge to action. So it was like, okay, we've got all this data, but people were bragging about how much data that they had. And that like sort of seemed beside the point. The question was that I thought was more interesting is what is the insight that we're going to derive from analyzing that data, and then what action does that inform? And if you can say these are the decisions that we have to make, where if we could do a better job, most people on both sides of the aisle would think that
Right.
was a good thing.
Right. Better, faster, cheaper. Okay, Rafi, question for you. Have you seen examples of groups balancing the need for transparency with the need for protecting the individuals whose data is being used to train these systems?
Yeah, I mean, there's like whole questions. I'm on the board of a community health worker program in Africa. They operate in Kenya, Rwanda, and a few other countries. And for those who don't know what community health workers do, is they're basically non-medical people who go and work in their communities. They're non-trained, who go work in their communities and like find issues, connect them with actual doctors, do medical tracking, data information. But like you're collecting information about every single person. We want to go use that information to train models to figure out like where should we do interventions next? Where is vaccination rates? Where should we invest vaccination rates and things like that? And so what we end up doing is looking at trying to generate synthetic data based on that real data. So like we take all these real data sources, you feed it through an algorithm that creates data, creates people, quote unquote, that look kind of similar but are not actually the same people. And we then use that information to go do the work that we want to go do. So that way we can still get individual information. We have a privacy preserving step that then allows us to do real data science work, potentially AI work on top of that. That's not applicable in every single field, but it seems to work in some of these fields that like some human PII information is useful, is found in.
Yeah, and people are exploring other things like secure multi-party computation, where you're doing math on the data, but you're also keeping it encrypted. And federated learning is another approach. So rather than having to pull all the data to one, giant data warehouse or data lake, you leave the data where it is. So people are coming up with technologies that will hopefully allow us to have our cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
That is, be able to derive insights from the data while respecting personally identifiable information.
Rafi and Tom, as technologists who understand the tech components and see the opportunities of AI, how do you communicate those opportunities to those of us who are fearful of it and its impact on society?
Well, I think that I don't think that people should trust technologists. I think that technologists have to demonstrate that it actually solves a problem, number one. And number two, if it's going to cause other problems, that we know what those are. So I just talked about why I believe that AI-powered digital tutors that model the interaction between an expert and a novice might be useful for improving student learning outcomes, and we have some evidence for that. But we also have some evidence that suggests that too much interaction with an AI could reduce critical thinking skills if the student is uncritically accepting the answer that they're getting from the AI. So I think that, to me, the question comes back is, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? What would constitute evidence that AI is making a contribution in the same way that we have at least some preliminary evidence that suggests that a self-driving car can reduce accidents relative to a human driver by 88 to 92%. And then what are the unintended negative consequences that maybe the developer was not thinking about when they created? So I think it's perfectly reasonable for people to have a show me attitude, because I think technologists are always going to have a bias that this is all goodness.
I mean, we technologists love the things we build. Like, that's the reason we do it. It's because we desperately love the things that we build. But like, people should question. Like there should be a level of discourse to understand like what's really going on here, and we should be able to explain it. Like, you should demand that of technologists in a lot of ways. And similarly, like, and I mean this with the utmost respect, like we use this term, especially when we're building AI systems or machine learning systems, called a black box. It's a box that like takes data, does something with it, and gives you a decision at the end. And you don't really know what that something is. It's a black box. You can't see inside it. Judges are kind of like black boxes too.
Yep.
Like, so you don't really know what's going on in a judge's head, but you could ask them, you can ask these questions of them, you can like try to understand why they're doing the things that they're doing. And these systems right now, these AI systems, like, they're not set up in a way that you can always just interrogate them in the similar way that I could in that judge. So when you say you don't trust the systems or what should we need to do, it's like, I understand where you're coming from. We as technologists actually owe you more in some way.
Just to build on that, the latest Chinese frontier model that they just open sourced has 640 billion parameters in it. So so talk about a black box, right? So like nobody at this point knows why it generates the answer that it does in response to a particular input. Now, there is work going on in a field called interpretable machine learning, and there's a researcher, Cynthia Rudin, who's I believe at Duke, and she's done a lot of work to say that you can have glass box algorithms rather than black box algorithms. That is, you can have the same level of performance, but you can have a much more interpretable decision about why the algorithm is, recommending that you do X as opposed to Y. So that is an active area of research.
Glass box, Rafi?
Yes.
Rafi?
I would love glass boxes. But I think that's one of the things that consumers should demand of us. Like, demand that everything we build as glass boxes. Then maybe we can deliver on that.
Transparency.
Yep.
Okay, so here's another question. Is the first step to persuade stakeholders to collect data uniformly instead of siloed among actors in the justice system? Yeah, but you can't do that, is what you're saying, unless it's towards, like, what's the incentive?
Well,
that it's,
I mean, let me give you an example.
I'm so into it.
Governor Raimondo, before she became
Treasury
Secretary of Commerce, she was governor of Rhode Island, and she collaborated with a technology-based nonprofit called Research Improving People's Lives. And what they did was to work with all the different state agencies that have education data, that have workforce data, that have human services data, to create a secure data enclave. And that allowed researchers to answer the following types of questions, which is, currently, the cutoff for whether we provide this type of intervention for low birth weight babies is X. What if we changed it to Y? And what they discovered is that spending an extra $6,000 on low birth weight babies ultimately saves $60,000 and increases college attendance by 17 percentage points. So it is incredibly powerful if you can identify a political leader who is a governor, for example, or a mayor, who is saying, I want to make it a priority to integrate the data from multiple departments and agencies so that researchers can ask and answer these types of questions. I think that's very powerful, but you have to have someone in that
The
position
governor's office, yeah.
because that is unlikely to happen organically.
But I mean, there are plenty of tools right now which are using data that's probably collected in incorrect or imperfect ways. Like, I mean, there's a classical data science photo of just like they wanted to patch the World War II bombers, trying to figure out like where they should actually patch all the bullet holes. So they're taking a look at all these bombers that are coming back, and they're looking at all the bullet holes, and like, we should put the patches there. Turns out it's the ones that didn't come back is like where those bullet holes are the where you should be doing the patching. So like, you know, Oxford has a domestic abuse prevention system where they try to do prediction of domestic abuse and try to figure out how to like rate households as like whether or not they're at risk or not at risk. Wow. And the way they tried to get around this problem I just mentioned, the bomber problem effectively, is like they didn't look at police records. Because if you look at police records, it's only the households that reported that they had domestic abuse. What about all the ones that didn't report domestic abuse? So they actually worked with the community to actually try to do a comprehensive survey of Oxford and sample properly and understand even the ones that didn't report it so that they can properly get that kind of scoring. Like these stories happen all the time in these systems. So like in your blank slate problem, yeah, like we're gonna kind of need a problem that we're gonna fix. But there are people all over the world right now who are deploying systems that are probably solving their problems incorrectly, and we need to go and help them actually make sure they're measuring it properly.
That domestic violence, I'm going to follow up on that because that's really interesting that they didn't use the police records, because that's part of the problem again with the bias in the police records.
Measuring the wrong thing.
Yeah. We're right at time, and I have a final question. If we could unlock its full potential, if we could create the data infrastructure, could or might AI transform the criminal justice system? So long as we create a goal or a purpose, could it?
Yeah, I mean, for example, just the application that I talked about, using advanced technologies for training to reduce prison recidivism, I think that would be a big deal.
Yeah.
I think, there are organizations like Recidiviz that are allowing parole officers to integrate data from multiple sources and saying, okay, these 10 things have to be true before I can offer parole. This person that I'm responsible for managing has 9 of the 10. How do I track it? How do I get that last 10th thing to happen? So, that doesn't involve AI. That, to your point, that's just about integration of data across multiple stovepipes.
Yep.
I'm super optimistic. I absolutely think
You're technically optimistic.
I'm technically optimistic. I mean, there are so many steps, but like, I was reading a report the other day that like judges in Cobb County spend 30 seconds looking at a case before they walk into their courtroom. 30 seconds. Like, so if that's the reality we live in, how can we get all the information packaged in the right way so that we can better inform that judge in those 30 seconds? There are transformative things we can do. It just takes a lot of work, and we got to get that data infrastructure in place.
It's like the joke about, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. You've filled my brain with interesting things, and I'm sure we've all benefit from it. So I loved this conversation. I hope to continue it. And thank you.
Thank you.